Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Azure Virtual Desktop, Unleashing the Power of Cloud-Based Workspaces. My name is Rachel Clendaniel, Marketing Coordinator here at Kite Technology. Our presenters today are Adam Atwell, Chief Technology Officer at Kite Technology Group, and Frank Albani, Manager of MSP Customer Success at Nerdio. We're glad you are joining us today and are excited to be sharing today's content. Before I hand this over to the team, here's a little bit more information about Kite Technology. Kite Technology is a managed IT service provider and consulting firm serving small and mid-sized businesses across the country. We specialize in serving independent insurance agencies, nonprofits, and other professional organizations, but work with many different businesses across a variety of industries. Our goal is to help the organizations we partner with leverage technology so they can operate more efficiently, be more secure, and improve their overall business performance. Listed here are some of the IT services we offer. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you with your technology needs, feel free to reach out in our webinar Q&A or contact us after the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Adam and Frank to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, guys. My name is Adam Atwell. I'm our CTO or Chief Technology Officer. Also one of our partners here at Kite Technology Group. I get to help folks on their journey to the Microsoft Cloud. And so I'm here today and excited to talk about Azure Virtual Desktop with you guys. Frank?
Yeah, excited to be with you, Adam, and Kite team and all of you in attendance. So exciting to be here. And I'll take a second to introduce myself to you. As Rachel kindly mentioned, I'm a member of MSP Customer Success here at Nerdio. I have about 8 years prior to Nerdio working at a managed services provider, much like Kite Tech. So I kind of come from the same roots. I think it helps me to help partners like Kite Technology to do more with Azure, having kind of gone through the same steps myself before. And so one of the things I really loved when I was at my MSP was I got to talk to clients about how to really help them to be successful in their business by leveraging technology solutions similar to Azure and Azure Virtual Desktop. So really excited to chat with you today, Adam, and everyone else here in attendance. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Take a peek here. You can see the agenda there in front of you. And so we're going to just kind of dive right in to the evolution of really cloud desktops or virtual desktops along the way. So without further ado, this fancy slide with evolution of desktops. A lot of folks like to kind of see things on a little bit of a timeline. So here's a peek ahead of what we're going to talk about. What we see as an evolution from what was on-premise, then kind of moved from on-premise to private hosted before really the data centers of the world really got big, and then cloud version 1 and cloud version 2, and those are kind of we're at cloud version 2, if you will, in terms of where this timeline lives. We didn't have a chance to validate all the facts of when these timelines triggered too many Wikipedia conflicts, but this is just kind of how we see the evolution a little bit here. So that first step of on-premise, you may be familiar with some of these terms. Microsoft Terminal Services or terminal servers is a conversation you may have had back in the day, where you would have a server in the building and you'd log on and you'd get to that terminal server to get access to your files and your folders, and then oftentimes a local application. And so terminal services got renamed at some point in the last 10 plus years, and it got titled to Remote Desktop Services, or RDS. And that was just kind of Microsoft rebranding it as they started to change the technology and see it grow to the cloud. And then early days, I think this is dating my memory, maybe Frank, you can validate this or deny it, somewhere in the 2008 server era is when kind of RDS published apps started. And so it was really very basic back then, very simplistic, but it was crude, but it worked. And so that's what we call the on-premise portion there. Frank, anything you want to add other than a beautiful smile?
No, I'll keep that beautiful smile going this whole time, Adam. I know you love it, but I think you're spot on. A lot of folks are familiar with RDS. It's what they know, terminal servers. It kind of dates way back to the very early days And kind of sometimes in technology, these things last a long time. If you really hit it well for that time period, it'll stick around for a long time. And I'm sure folks who are in attendance here today have heard of these terms because they've been around for quite a while, and it still kind of is prevalent even in today's technology landscape.
Awesome. So taking kind of that step to the evolution of virtual desktops, imagine, the terminal servers, now RDS servers of the world, and then a couple other players really entered the market. Citrix has been in the game for a long time, providing virtual desktop infrastructure and then VMware as well. And so the private hosted version of this, you'd see a lot of folks turning up data centers, and they would sell space to companies like us or like you. And then we would buy space in that data center and go ahead and leverage these software technologies to access our infrastructure. And so that was really the first step of the private hosted. A lot of times that would avoid the costs of those servers that you would buy. It would also allow you to kind of scale up or down a little bit, right? And then you could also defer some of the capital expenses, all at once, because you'd be paying for somebody in the private hosted game that's leveraging these technologies and services for you. And so this is really just that second step. As we see with all technology, when more competitors enter the marketplace, you see the solutions driving forward in terms of their capabilities. And so, this kind of second stage of, the virtual desktop infrastructure, really Citrix and VMware and Microsoft all really approach this in uniquely different ways, I think. And it really started kind of what we're seeing as what is modern today. So this was the second version in kind of the private hosted boom we saw a little bit. So that lasted for a little while, right? Until kind of what we really think of as kind of the initial cloud version started to come through. And most of you in the room here probably have heard the terms we put on the screen here of IaaS, infrastructure as a service, or DaaS, desktop as a service. And so these are industry acronyms that are in an acronym encyclopedia somewhere. But more or less what they mean is, instead of you owning, managing those servers, you're buying that infrastructure. And so that's really kind of what some of that early day hosting was, right? But it really got formalized where you could really buy an infrastructure in a box. And so it went from the early days of, on-prem hardware, and then companies that were in the hosting business, to now evolving to the major players starting to develop services around IaaS. Amazon Workspaces and Azure hosted remote desktop services. So taking that RDS infrastructure and really putting it right directly on top of, Microsoft's cloud infrastructure. You also saw it on the Google infrastructure as well as the Amazon infrastructure. So you'd see a lot of what was on site or being sold by smaller companies that were in the hosting business, the big boys of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. I think those are the biggest boys there. Frank, are we missing any of the boys or gals?
Not that I'm aware of. You covered them.
So, standing up those servers all over the place. And then as the IaaS really grew to the big players in the market, we started to see the early versions of desktop as a service evolve there as well. And so really kind of privatized or single seats of Windows, desktop OSs. And really, I think this is dating my knowledge a little bit, but I kind of feel like Amazon Workspaces was one of the early creators, alongside of what RDS and terminal server solutions were in the marketplace, with kind of a hosted desktop package as Microsoft was building out the modern versions of these things. Yeah. So that's a little bit on kind of that first version of cloud, as we've titled it. And then cloud version 2, this is more or less where we're at here today. And so you take the two things we started to talk about of infrastructure as a service, desktop as a service, And then want to talk about a platform, and really, if you look at something, everyone here in the room is using or has heard of Microsoft 365 or Google Workspaces or G Suite, right? And or Office 365. There's a handful of other platforms out there, of course, as well, that aren't as large, but are more sector-based or vertical-based. But really, this is taking these pieces of a virtual infrastructure that's infrastructure as a service or a desktop as a service, and then really integrating it to cloud services like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. And so you're taking not just where you sit and you do your work, but also the extended SaaS applications or software as a service apps, and really kind of linking it all together for a centrally managed platform or environment, right? And there is a version 3 that we're already in the midst of now that we're not covering during this webinar because it's an ever growing thing called, a lot of people talk about it, calling it secure edge. And really, and what that means is taking all this stuff, you're accessing it and extending security around it wherever you're at in the world, whether it's at McDonald's Wi-Fi, if you want to take that risk, that's fine. I'm making a joke. I hope somebody at least laughed, but we tease sometimes when people get on Teams meetings and their connection's spotty, and I'm like, are you really doing Wi-Fi from the pool? Like, are you at that McDonald's Wi-Fi? But really, there is this version 3 of all of this technology, and it's really the space between where you live and you work and where all this stuff is that you get to, and the network layers between it. And so that's a whole nother technical conversation, but that's a little bit about the evolution. Maybe we're going to hone in here and start talking about the specifics of the Microsoft stuff.
Yeah, Adam, if I can, just while you're, one last thing on that slide, right, is like for me, with Cloud version 2, you're basically marrying all of those technologies, your IaaS, your DaaS, your PaaS, right? And what Microsoft's cloud is doing, what Google Cloud does, is they're giving you, your desktop compute, they're giving you your backend infrastructure for your servers, and then they're also giving you all your software applications, right? Your SaaS apps like Teams, like OneDrive, like SharePoint, and all those collaboration apps, and they're giving you all of that under their platform, right? Keeping it all in-house for peak efficiency and interoperability. So I think that's what we're seeing, especially in the market with where we are today, is these big players like Microsoft and Google are purchasing more and more services that maybe other people are doing well, but it's in a silo, right? And as a business, nobody wants a siloed application because now it has to be managed all on its own, and it doesn't really play nice with the other applications you need, your other workloads. And so I think what we're seeing now is Microsoft saying, let's give you that all-in-one solution, right? And I think that's important.
Definitely. Two other things. One, we're going to throw another poll on the screen here. This is just going to ask you which of these technologies we've talked about you're familiar with in some way. So look for that poll here. Rachel's going to throw it on the screen. Any of them. If you're not, check all the boxes. It's a multi-select, and so go ahead and do that and submit. We're going to shift to the second part of the agenda where we start talking about the Microsoft desktop, virtual desktop solution specifically here. So Frank, why don't you take it over here at the Windows 365 piece? What is that thing?
Yeah, for sure. So, when I think of Windows 365 and I think of cloud PCs, really what it is, it's a standard offering from Microsoft to give you a computer in the cloud, right? And all they're doing is Microsoft's giving you the ability to have a quick, easy to stand up deployment of a Windows 10, Windows 11 machine that's dedicated to a specific user. And that user can, click a couple buttons and now they're signed into their desktop from wherever they are. And I think, Adam, if we move to the next slide, there's a couple things that you can break down and visualize here. But I think the benefit is, in today's hybrid workforce, I think in many environments, where you're doing work at home, you're doing work on the go, you're traveling, and then maybe you're in the office as well. And isn't it funny how the office is the last one I mentioned now here post-COVID era is, maybe you're in the office, but probably at home like myself. But that being said,
this is my office.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That could be another poll we put up, right? How many are in an office or actually at home today? I'd be curious to see the numbers. But But all that being said, you want the same, consistent experience no matter where you are, right? And I think like in days before stuff like this has come out, you had people who had their desktop machine and they had their files they're working on there. They're doing all sorts of things on that machine in the office, and then they go home and they have next to nothing that they were working on. They can't just pick up where they left off, and that's a huge minus for companies, and it's a huge waste of efficiency when it comes to getting the same experience no matter where you are. And so that's where cloud PCs come in, is they're easy to kind of deploy and stand up. They're very quick to get you going. And actually, if you go to the next slide, I think some of these things, we'll start to talk about maybe where it makes sense for business owners or different people who are in attendance here today listening in. Where does Windows 365 make sense? Well, I think, if you look at what's here on screen, the fact is that maybe you don't need a lot of virtual desktop experience, right? Maybe you've never, when you answered that poll, maybe you never heard of Citrix, maybe you never heard of RDS, maybe you never heard of any of those technologies, and that's totally fine. But the cool thing is nowadays, Microsoft has made it really easy to consume these technologies. And especially if you work with, partners like Kite, you're going to get that experience, coming with all that, right? And they can help you guide you along that journey. But that being said, 365, Windows 365 cloud PCs, very easy to start going with, right? You can deploy and manage them using built-in consoles within the Microsoft 365 cloud, and you're really going to have some really predictable monthly pricing per user. They kind of have like these different SKUs, if you want to think of it that way, similar to maybe what you're doing today with your Windows 365 licensing or your M365, right? Business Premium, your E3 plans, whatever it may be for your email and everything else that comes with those different SKUs. The Windows 365 gives you a very similar price model in that way.
Power users, basic users, and a little bit in between, right?
Yes, exactly, right. So if you have someone who doesn't have a ton of requirements, get a more basic SKU, right, of that cloud PC. Whereas you have a power user, you can level up and get something a bit more expensive to meet the needs there. So that being said, yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Just one other quick add, and we're not really. I mean, this is about Azure Virtual Desktop, guys. Make no mistake, that's what we're really focused in on here. But I'll highlight, these technologies continue to evolve along with our business needs. So we're going to see a mix. We've continued to see a mix of both of these for different use cases, and it's not a matter of one size fits all for either. It really is a matter of what makes sense for your business. That being said, I think we're probably moving forward, but the low technical ramp is one thing I do want to highlight here. Just on the on the Windows 365 side, you can buy a PC and it's just like you bought it at Best Buy, right? It's gonna come out of box, it's gonna work, it's gonna be there in the cloud. Right. It's tied to you as a user, so I can't share it with Frank physically. I can't share it. That's the same here. But one of the things that you should know is it doesn't fix itself. It doesn't maintain itself. You still have to have a partner, an IT company that's managing that thing, right? And so that's just one other thing to keep in mind. Just because I can buy a laptop or I can get a license doesn't mean that all the things of security just work. It does require maintenance, babysitting, and security and compliance to be wrapped around all of that. And so that was just one thing that's true for both of these technologies. But that's one last little piece on Windows 365. What's this Azure Virtual Desktop thing, Frank?
Yeah, so obviously this is what we want to get into, the meat and potatoes of the webinar now. But Azure Virtual Desktop, I would say a lot of the things we just spoke about, you get a lot of similarities as far as it's a computer in the cloud whereby you can do your desktop computing, catch up on emails, do your web browsing, access your SaaS-based applications. All those things you can get in your Azure Virtual Desktop, right? And I think that's, again, hugely beneficial for a lot of organizations today in that hybrid workforce that we now many times find ourselves in. And so one of the things I was going to mention is, Microsoft, if you've used RDS or you're using RDS with remote desktop services or terminal servers, you're now going to see that Microsoft has made a huge shift from RDS. They're no longer really giving it a ton of attention. Their go-to solution now is to put all of that up into Azure, right? Microsoft's cloud, where they're maintaining all the hardware for you. They are, handling all the scalability of Azure, and that the data centers encompassed within that. They're handling all that for you, right? Which is great, because now you don't have to worry about refreshing hardware for those desktops and things like that. You're being maintained within Microsoft's cloud. But now you're seeing where you're gonna get away from those RDS deployments. You're gonna move into an Azure Virtual Desktop. And the cool thing is that your line of business apps that you need, that you run your business off of, can really run from anywhere. So again, you have a remote workforce. Maybe you have a subset of users that you don't want them just kind of using any old laptop to access your secure type of confidential information. That's a big thing. I see that a lot working here at Nerdio, specifically with AVD deployments. There's a lot of times people are just looking for a solution because they're standing up a remote workforce, maybe overseas, maybe they need something really, really quick, right? Like in an instant, they're doing a big acquisition or a merger, and they want to kind of unify everyone under one roof. Well, Azure can be that roof that you can put everyone under, right? And so I think that's a great use case, I would say. We'll get into that a bit later, but a great use case to make sure that you're running your line of business apps from anywhere you are.
Yeah. And I think the challenges and realities of technology change are real, right? It's not just about end users needing to, learn something, but let's just say you guys had that whole server infrastructure in-house and that server died, right? This is a place where you can literally lift that environment as is, right? Or you can rebuild it pretty fast and continue to work along the way that you're used to. And so you don't get that kind of scalability in a standalone desktop environment where you can customize, oh, I need a file server, or my application needs to run locally on the same network because it's not a SaaS-based or a web or cloud-based app, right? Those are the kinds of things where Azure really allows you to be very flexible in what your needs are. So what about, like, how does this thing work technically, Frank? What does it look like under the hood a little bit?
Absolutely. So when you look at, what's happening under the hood, and for maybe some folks in our audience, they don't really care too much about the technical details, and that's okay, right? That's why you have, folks like Adam at Kite to help you with all those challenges and to navigate that. But I think it's important to really understand what Microsoft is doing, right? How this is all being delivered to you as a service. And so I'm going to start at the bottom of this graphic here, Adam, if you don't mind. And
yeah,
when I think about it, anytime you're running a computer, right, there's three core components. There's the compute, right, your RAM and your CPU that are actually going to process and crunch those applications and the software that you're running. You take care of that for you. Your storage, which is where all your files are going to live, and then your networking, right? How do you connect to the internet? How do you connect to the outside world? Well, the cool thing with Azure Virtual Desktop is you're getting all of that provided to you from Microsoft. So you don't have to maintain, that hardware in-house. You don't have to worry, did a drive fail at 2 o'clock in the morning last night, and now we need to replace it and scramble to bring us back up because, this happened unforeseen, right? And something bad happened to us. Microsoft's managing and handling all that for you, maintaining all of that. And then as you move to the layer above, now this is where you have a little bit more control. What sort of experience do we want our users to have? Do we want, if starting from the right-hand side, do we want just to deliver a remote application, right? Do we need just like to deliver QuickBooks or any other software, workload that's out there? Do we need to just deliver just the application? We don't necessarily want to publish a full desktop to these users. We just want to give them their app that they need, right? They can do everything else locally on their machine, but this one app, we need to deliver over an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. That's an option for you. The other thing you can do is you could also give your users a full multi-session desktop experience with a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 machine. So what that really means is, it means that in Azure Virtual Desktop, you can get big chunks of RAM and CPU that you can then have your users share out all in whichever way you'd like them to. So for instance, in a traditional environment, maybe you have a 2-core 8 gig machine, right? That user is accessing on a day-to-day basis, let's say. Well, the challenge with that is that you're essentially giving them just that. That's their ceiling, right? They can only use 8 gigs of RAM at any given time. Whereas if you use a multi-session type of deployment, let's say you have a 64 gig machine that you're sharing with a handful of other users. Well, maybe someone's out to lunch, or maybe someone's not using their virtual desktop right now. So that just means more power, more resources for me while I'm using that machine. So I can have this burst capability that I would never be able to have otherwise and get more work done.
Yep.
And then the last piece is the top layer. Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say, I think one other thing that's important there in the sharing mentality is, you really can scale this thing and share those resources you're paying for, right, on the monthly side of things. Whereas, a lot of the virtual desktop solutions that are user-based are literally that. They're locked in for the user and only the user, so you can't share those server resources with others. It's kind of like that concept of a physical PC you buy. It's just for you. And so that's one of the other flexible parts, right, to share for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally love that.
I think that top layer is a little bit detailed for this audience, but generally what you guys want to hear in that, sorry, Frank, to jump on this piece, is just that we have all this tech behind the Microsoft system that is there for us to help make smart decisions, manage things, secure things, reroute things. Like if you think about the redundancies that live when you're paying for a technology like on top of Azure, we don't have to worry about those servers crashing and those drives crashing. The uptime guarantees 95 nines. It's there, right? And if something goes wrong, they pay you back for it. So those things are things they don't want to happen, right? Because it's money coming out of their pocket. And largely, Microsoft does a pretty good job of keeping this stuff up and continues to grow in their value of what they offer for consumers of their products like us. So.
Love it. So last slide on this particular side of things is, with Azure Virtual Desktop, you have the ability to quickly deploy virtual desktops and applications to enable really secure remote work. Again, back to that scenario I gave. Maybe you need to do some offshore, quick assemble some offshore workers or something like that, let's say, or somewhere geographically different or diverse from where you are. Quickly deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop environment, and those users are going to be able to securely get in. You don't have to worry about, do they have antivirus on their local machine, right? Like here they are working on your company data with no antivirus, right? Who knows what they're doing in the off hours on that bring your own device that they have, right? That laptop that they're running. Who can guarantee the performance of that bring your own device, right? Maybe it's 8 years old and it runs terribly. And so it's slowing them down, but you're paying them an hourly rate, let's say, to get some work done, right? Now you can guarantee that you're giving them the resources they need in order to be really effective and efficient for you as a business owner, let's say.
But these are the pieces around the Microsoft cloud infrastructure, right? It's got the Microsoft 365 apps you know and love. Maybe you don't, I don't know, but you have to use them anyway. It's got Microsoft Endpoint Manager. If you're a client of ours or you've heard us speak, we talk about this all the time. It's really the way to manage your devices, right? It's Microsoft's system for your device management. It's also called Intune. They've changed the name a few times. They're back to Intune. But then you have Microsoft Defender, all the security that comes along with that, right? And then, of course, Azure Active Directory, we're still keeping that name up here because for us, we're slow to confuse people with all the name changes, right? And so it's also being called Entra as well. And so this is, hey, here's the benefit. All this Microsoft stuff works with each other. And what better way to integrate and take advantage of that than if you're working in the same product space? You'll find value and features that don't live across other cloud virtual desktop platforms you only get with Microsoft and Microsoft technology. We talked about a little bit, about the security and kind of blending the ecosystem. You can see these are services that work together, right? And so you have all these smart people doing the Azure stuff from a security perspective, all the digital footprints that come through that infrastructure that they learn from and pay attention to. That's all on our side. We're learning from that. We're growing from that. We're protecting your stuff. And then, of course, you can see that AVD and Microsoft 365 are built to work with each other. So you want to talk about MFA. How many of you want to have 3 different ways that you authenticate to your work environment? I don't. I'd like to have one, and then I'd like to have a backup in case not. I need to use 3 different methods to get in the door. And so that's another piece that's, from an integration perspective, that's there, and they're security forward, right? They're security first and security forward, meaning they're in the Gartner quadrant. If you've ever seen the 4 quadrants, they're in the top. Top right is where you want to be on almost all this stuff, or on their way there. And so that continues to be, be an obvious win. AVD versus the others, we did kind of already talk about, hey, if you're in Microsoft, integration across other Microsoft makes sense. The one other thing that we'll just cover briefly is if you're already paying for business premium, then you can leverage some of the license benefit you get there for Azure Virtual Desktop. So what does that mean? That means that yesterday you used to have to pay for something called a CAL, or a client access license, to use one of these. Microsoft saying you do have to pay for the power, the light switch, if you will, of what you're consuming in the cloud, but we're not going to get you for the software too. And so there are extra software costs, of course, if you need to turn on a SQL server or turn on a file server, or you have other apps that you have to stand up. There's licensing there, like there always is. But as far as the end user goes, your user license is covered in business premium. And so that's another benefit. We're gonna jump through some key features here, and we're gonna dial up the pressure a little bit because we want to make sure we get to the demo. We do have a demo coming up at the end, and then leave room for some Q&A. We hope you guys will engage in. We have a few questions that are building as well. But we talked about a lot of this. Frank, anything that comes to mind that really is from a security standpoint that you feel like this has been woven through the whole conversation today?
It has, but I think there's two parts in this slide, right? And I think each one of these is important. We've covered a bunch of them, but 2 things I want to call out really quick, right? The first thing is, when I was working at my MSP, talking to customers and business owners about how to protect their business, I would always talk about, laptop encryption, right? If you have a laptop on the go, you want to make sure that you're encrypting that machine. If you have a remote worker, encrypt that machine just in case it's lost or stolen, right? Or left in an airport. I had a customer leave a laptop in an airport one time, and so things like that, are big. But if all your data is actually stored up in an Azure and not on that local device, all that stuff kind of is a thing of the past as far as your worry of losing data exfiltration, going outside your firm or outside your business. That stuff isn't a thing anymore, right? And so that's a big part of AVD. The other one is in the upper right-hand side here, is that Microsoft Azure has more security engineers than any other data center in the world. And so like you may think, oh, like, no, I'm going to handle my own security, right? Who's going to come after me, small mom and pop shop out here, or whatever it may be. Well, I hate to say it, but you're a much easier target for these hackers to go after than, the giant fortress that is Azure. And so, kind of rest assured that your security is being covered by the best in the business in that way.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. Performance. We did talk about a little bit of, the scalability of this stuff. We can add and change and add more performance as needed. But how about a word on CapEx versus OpEx in terms of performance?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I always think of like desktops and laptops as like they are the cars of the IT world, right? The second you buy that car at full price and you take it off the lot, right, it decreases how much in value, right? A certain percentage. And that's the same thing with desktops and laptops. Like the second you buy them, they're already depreciating by the next month, by the next year, and then 3-5 years down the road, they're basically worthless, right? So to think of it that way, you're spending all this money in laptops and desktops when really they're just depreciating day after day. Whereas with Azure, the second a new version of hardware comes out in Azure, all you have to do is reboot your virtual desktop and you can be on the latest and greatest hardware, right? For about the same cost and sometimes even less, because Microsoft actually incentivizes you to move to the latest SKUs because they don't want to support their legacy hardware anymore. So they actually incentivize you to move forward, right? Which is obviously mutually beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, that's kind of a brain shift. I think that compared to what we're used to when we're thinking about performance. I mean, performance over time, all of us, I mean, how many times have you bought something and then it's obsolete, right? I think that's a really important thing to consider when you're thinking about the investment as it relates to, the capital investment of upfront or the operational expense of something like an AVD over time, for sure. I'm going to jump over to our maintenance and uptime. Realistically, when it comes to AVD, the way that these systems are built, let's just say there was an attack or a virus that hit a crypto locker on one of your hosts. Well, here's the good news. The good news is not that the security breach happened, right? But the good news is that the ability to create a new machine and have it up is super fast, right? When I say that, I don't mean seconds. We're in a day and age where we expect everything, of course, to happen right now. And if it's not now, it's not fast enough. But if any of you have been through a recovery event, I'm going to put an instant poll up myself right now. And if you've been through a recovery event where you've had a catastrophic failure from a server environment you've been through, it's something that takes time to recover from, right? And so when it comes to uptime and maintenance on these things, you can do maintenance in day. You can have minimal impact. You could roll up a second server and put users over to that while you're, updating and pushing that out. And so that's something really that you couldn't do before. You can't do that with the box that you have in your server back room, right? You can't without a whole lot of, significant money to turn on a second server for a 2-hour maintenance window and pay for that for 2 hours versus a year, right? That's super awesome. And so you can do that anytime. Backup, we keep that stuff in a central place, the recovery process. Funny quick story. I went and I did my very first one of these Azure Virtual Desktop environments, and I was moving about 20 terabytes worth of data from on-prem up. And so we were in the middle of cutover weekend. I was about five hours in to what looked like the end of the data migration. And the developer said to me, "Oh my goodness, I need some stuff off of the environment." Now I had already written over the live environment that we were migrating to. And because he said he needed something from there, I was like, okay, well, I'll just restore from backup. So I recovered from backup. Now I clicked the wrong button. I'm human. I make mistakes too. Microsoft MVPs do make mistakes, guys. And so, yep, there you go. So I actually recovered over this environment accidentally. And so I basically lost all that time, but then I reverted back and I was able to do 2 recoveries of a 20 terabyte environment and about 4 hosts and 2 servers. I did that within 2 hours. Like that's kind of unheard of if you've been through it. And so that backup's resilient and it's there and that's pretty awesome itself. We're going to shift now to dollars. Everybody cares about dollars, what you're spending. Frank, go ahead and highlight some of these dollars.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that we've kind of covered along the way here. But the biggest thing is, when you're making a decision today, let's say you're buying physical hardware or you're signing a long-term contract with a private cloud data center or something like that, you're basically making a decision based off of what you think your business will look like both now and potentially 5 years down the road, let's say, right? You're saddling yourself to a piece of hardware for the next 5 to 7 years. And no one knows what the future holds, right? Like so many different things can play in to really change your needs over time. And that's where, the scalability of Azure to be able to turn up resources when needed, but also to spin them down when no longer needed, depending on what shifts and changes at your business each and every day, each and every year. So I think that's a big part of it. And then it's the the ability to replace those outdated or pricey servers that are just taking up space and energy, right? If you're maintaining your own server today, it's hugely inefficient to do so, right? And it's not an apples to apples conversation when it comes to cloud versus on-prem. When you're buying on-prem hardware, you're not buying the same level of redundancy that you're going to get in Azure, right? You're maybe buying one machine, maybe a couple hosts or something like that, but you're not getting that level of redundancy that you can get when it comes to hosting an environment in Azure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And from a dollar standpoint, we talked about that for the recovery or the patching, those little windows. This is a little bit of a breakdown of what those costs look like. I know a lot of people don't care about these details. They just want the bottom line numbers. But Frank, speak to kind of that compute costs and let's talk. I mean, I know we're leading to the next slide here, but
Yep.
Yeah, tell folks about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think, us at Nerdio, like we help Kite to really give its customers the best experience and the best costs possible when hosting solutions in Azure, right? Whether it be Azure Virtual Desktop or Azure Infrastructure, we're going to be looking out for where can we find those efficiencies so that we're not paying more than we have to, with Azure being a consumption-based price model, right? You pay for what you use. It's kind of like your electricity bill. And so when we looked at it and we say, okay, people need their virtual desktops, let's say for 40 to 50 hours a week during a typical business week, right? Work week. Well, out of that amount of time, most of the spend is going towards their compute. It's really their uptime, right? The amount of time that they're running that desktop machine to service those users to do what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. And so what we said was, well, let's take that 40, 50-hour work week and let's give them everything they need during those peak business hours, but then let's scale down off hours so that they're not leaving the lights on for longer than they have to, right? It's like why would you leave your lights on all day long when you have daylight? It's kind of the same thing, right? And so that's the model that Kite employs. Anytime they run out an Azure Virtual Desktop type of deployment, they're going to make sure that those costs are really reined in and tweaked using Nerdio, truly.
Yeah. And so this is the small little plug. You guys know we're here, we're working together. And really the partnership that we formed here with Nerdio, we're expanding it across our business really. But this is we know that Nerdio helps us help you, right? And there's cost efficiencies, helping monitor and optimize that stuff. These guys are on the forefront of this stuff for sure. And they're going to continue to be leaders and working with Microsoft to help make this better for everyone. And so we're going to jump fast here to a couple of use case considerations, and then we'll pivot over to the demo with questions. One thing I'd like to throw up is this last slide, and this is purposeful. If you guys could show what region you're in, sorry, the last poll. This is going to be our last poll. We do have a question at the end here, but just tell us where you're at here. And there's a specific reason why we're asking this question. So we talk about use case considerations. Really, we have folks that are, really, why would I use AVD? Well, typically you're going to have a need for an application you're going to run inside your environment that's not necessarily SaaS-based or cloud-based, right? And so that's one of the driving factors. The second is for that scalable workforce, right? I need to, whether it's offshore help or back office help or something like seasonal employment, that's another one. Some spaces are more regulated than others, right? So in the modern hybrid world that we live in, we can see that everyone's distributed nowadays. You don't really have an office. And so this gives you an office in the cloud. And then from a pricing standpoint, you can get in on this without the capital expense. So these are reasons why a lot of folks come in and jump in. The other thing is really, when it comes to the future and the scalability, this stuff scales way better than a couple of PCs and a couple of servers do, for sure, based on your changing needs. And you can turn those things up and down based on where you're at. More specific scenarios. Thanks for asking or answering that question. So the reason we asked the question about regions, we'll close that out now. 72% of you guys are in the Northeast. What happens when the Northeast data centers get shut down? And something's going to happen. One of the layer internet pipes right between here in Baltimore and Ashburn, Virginia, if it gets shut down, or something up on, New York where Frank's at, if you couldn't pick up his accent, what about, well, the great news is Azure has data centers all across the US and globally across the world. So you can have failover clusters where you can spin up VMs in other regions. And that's something else to be really mindful of for really those scenarios where you really need tight uptime, and you want to make sure that you have redundancies there. So these are a couple of scenarios we've seen. Bring your own PC. That's what BYOPC means, right? You bring your own computer. that's fine. So long as you meet the requirements that we ask you, you can bring your own, connect you to Azure and, go with it. Mergers and acquisitions, we see that a lot in our vertical of independent insurance agencies where, we'll see folks come on board and then either ramp up their environment or support a legacy app. Those workforces, temporary workforces, how about high capacity computing? What does that look like? CAD, graphic intensive stuff. Those computers are expensive. What if you just rented them, right? And you could turn them up real fast. DR, like I had mentioned, diverse regions because of disasters. Those are other scenarios that allow you to be more resilient easily. And then really security and regulatory compliance comes back to some of those highly regulated industries where you have to have tight doors. And I would predict it's not that far off before we land in a place where all the hybrid workforce that we love and are conveniently encouraged to use shifts again to another model that's more regulated and says, you got to go to the cloud to get your data. You can't touch it on your own PC. And so some industries have that today, right? You look at anything in the federal space that's heavily regulated, DOD and GCC high, those are places where you'll see that stuff from a security perspective or compliance. So that's a little bit on the use case. We're going to jump for the live demo now. And then after we're going to start answering questions. So Frank, hit it. What does this thing look like?
Yeah, so this is always my favorite part, to get to show what's under the hood, what's happening, and how you will actually interface with your Azure Virtual Desktop. So if y'all can see my screen here, threw in a y'all there just to keep you guessing as far as where that accent is, where I'm coming to you from. But Adam is correct. I'm a Long Island guy, so I'm here in the Northeast myself, just like many of you. But if you look here, I meant to say this earlier. I'm glad I can kind of say it now, but the great part about Azure Virtual Desktop is it's very device agnostic, right? So any end device you're using, whether it be an iPad, whether it be a Mac, as you can see on my screen here, whether it be a Windows device, even a Chromebook potentially, right? Like all these different end devices that may be out there, you have the ability and the luxury to sign into that Windows 10, that business desktop from anywhere, from any device, which is obviously super convenient for all of your workforce. And so that being said, there's this little app or icon that's downloadable from basically any app store out there, and it's called Microsoft Remote Desktop. And so you open up that application, this little red icon. Initially, you would just simply put in your email credentials to add the workspace. I've obviously done that for my virtual desktop here. And once you've done it that first time, every time you open up the app, you're going to see this workspace show up. So if I double click on the workspace, it's going to start to load up my Azure Virtual Desktop. I'm going to be prompted for my credentials. Go ahead and pop those in. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to get signed right into a Windows 10 multi-session environment. And so again, the cool thing is once I get signed in here, which you can see, this is my work desktop. This is what I use day in and day out. But if I go ahead and right click and hit the task manager here, you can see that the performance of this machine, again, we're barely scratching the surface as far as memory. I have 47 gigs available of memory to use, literally for myself if I needed to, right? I'm sharing this machine with a couple other people here at Nerdio, and we're barely scratching the surface of utilizing, all those resources there. Yes, thank you, Windows. Have to change my password. Okay, that being said, what I wanted to show you quickly, guys, while I have you in my demo, is once you're in, right, go ahead and start your web browsing. Start doing what you need to do. I actually wanted to show you this. This is pretty awesome. I like to show it. Everyone mostly is probably familiar with the speed test at this point. Well, this is what you're getting here within Microsoft Azure, right? So check it out. As soon as I kick off this speed test, no office that I know of is getting these sorts of speeds, right? This 2.5 gigs of download speed. I think it's like 3 gigs of upload speed. No one's getting that, in their local office, wherever you are. And if you are, you're paying through the nose for it. Here, we stand up an Azure Virtual Desktop and look what we get right at our fingertips. They're available for us. So I wanted to show that because I think that kind of shows, the power that comes in a solution like this. Another thing I wanted to quickly show is that you now have the ability to pull in any of some of your local resources on let's say you're joining in from a Mac. So for me, I'm joining in on my MacBook. And if I wanted to, I could basically pull in the local folders from my Mac. So if I needed to transfer folders into my AVD, transfer files in, I have that nice ability to do so, to go and bring in those files with ease here, right? And just browse my local directory. The same thing can be said for local printers. So if you have local printers and scanners, all of those will be able to redirect in to your AVD session as well. So don't necessarily have to worry about any of that. And so for me, if I just wanted to pull open a document, print it out of AVD, if I had a printer added to my local machine, it's going to show up and be a redirected printer here in this AVD environment. So that being said, yeah, I just wanted to give a quick test drive on how easy it is to get connected right into AVD to get started. And the cool thing is, like, I can access this through a web browser even. I can access it through the RDP app that I showed you, and I can just pick up wherever I was, right? So if I wanted to keep my work where I was and I have to go travel to a customer site or go out to lunch or whatever, I can open up my laptop, sign back into AVD, and all my applications are there ready to go, and I'm doing my thing.
That's awesome, Frank. Thanks for the demo. We're gonna go ahead and throw another poll on the screen here as we address questions in rapid fire. And so we're gonna hit them. Frank was working from a Mac. Somebody had asked earlier, you know, can we use a Mac in this scenario? And the answer is, you know, yes, we can. We can access a Mac. And so you can do it from a Mac on Windows 365 or on Azure Virtual Desktop, no problem. Like Frank, I am a walking contradiction. I live and breathe Microsoft all day long. I have 2 kids whose names are Macintosh, their middle names, and I'm an Apple guy as well. Not an Apple MVP. I don't think they have that, but all that being said, cross-platform works just fine. And for places where you don't have native support, the web support works in most cases. Question here from Dila, I'm going to pronounce this wrong and I'm sorry. Does the virtual desktop recognize the local camera? Yes, local camera and sound, definitely. How likely is it for the desktop PC or hardware to become obsolete or incompatible for this environment? That's a great question. And I think, you know, largely if you're using something, thinking about kind of support, you know, in the realm of what we're in now, we're in a Windows 10/11 era. You know, you could still get away with Windows 8 and 8.1 supporting Microsoft Edge and getting in on the browser. I think like anything, Kim, you're going to have that line of, hey, I got to have a compatible, you know, OS, you know, to work with it. So I think you want to think in terms of that, not more than 5-year life cycle from purchase. Most folks do plan around the 3 to 5 year cycle. And so I would say that's still a typical kind of thing that'll come along for sure. So going down, sorry, Frank, I'm reading through these. Anything special to note about attaching multiple monitors, Frank? Can we do multi-monitor here in Azure?
Sure can. AVD supports up to 16 external monitors that you can bring to an AVD session. So I've not seen anyone anywhere close to that. So I think we should be covered in that regard.
Awesome. Can a single employee subscribe to Azure while the rest of the staff are on a private network? So yes, they can, Ed. We don't typically see those scenarios. Typically, when we have an Azure Virtual Desktop need, it's 1 of 2 things as starting points on the minimum side, either like a legacy line of business app that you need for historical purposes, and the cheapest way to manage that is to throw it in the cloud because multiple users might need to get to it. If that's not the scenario and you're using your primary business app for your whole organization, we typically see, you know, things kind of make sense financially about it, 10 users. But if you're just looking to access a cloud desktop for one person, likely Windows 365 makes sense unless you have legacy architecture or an app you're putting in the cloud along with it. But it is possible for a single employee to do Azure Virtual Desktop. It just typically doesn't make sense. When would you recommend Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365 if it's less than 5 users? Again, same kind of question and answer, and really appreciate all of your questions here. I wish I could pronounce your name right. I'm horrible about those things. I can't really spell that well either. I'm sorry. But
Adam, are we looking at Delia's comment
that's
there?
what I thought, but I thought I was going to pronounce it wrong. So yes. So Delia, for that, 5 users would be fine on Windows 365. They could also be fine on Azure Virtual Desktop as well, because if you're really managing when you need those machines on and turn them on as needed, the costs, might make sense and might net out to being about the same thing. So it's just a matter of what other needs you have. Typically, again, what we find is Azure Virtual Desktop makes sense for highly regulated, highly secured, or numbers at scale. So on the smaller end, unless you have access requirements for an old app you need to put in a central location that's not SaaS-based, that's really when we start to think about it. Does Windows 365 tie into our existing Microsoft tenant and sync with Active Directory? We have on-prem Active Directory, and Azure. Can the admin configure and do all the things between them? Great question. And so, yes, you can create the connection. Of course, it's the only way to go. If you ask me or Frank, we're going to say the same thing. You connect your Azure Virtual Desktop to your Microsoft 365, both of which are connected to Entra. And that allows you to have a single place for authentication, multi-factor authentication, user management. And then if you're leveraging the rest of the cloud technologies like OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams, you can really access that stuff between Azure Virtual Desktop or even a local PC, depending on what the needs are. Frank, anything you want to add there?
Nope, I think I covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Awesome. So Steve says, so with all the cloud, what type of laptops or workstations, what are the minimal specs for this? And really, it's funny, Steve, that you asked that. I mean, if you can run a web browser, you're good to go here. And I mean, the rest is really a matter of multi-monitor and those kinds of things. But almost any computer off the shelf can really drive and do a virtual desktop environment. You do see things like lag and those kinds of things on the lower performance machines. Maybe the video translation here and the experience might not be as good, but largely low bar in terms of the requirements. Kim says, am I renting a desktop? What happens if all my data files, if I miss a payment, will I lose access? And so if you're buying directly from Microsoft, you pay for that usage monthly. I've never been in a situation where I've missed an Azure bill, but I have been in a situation where we've had clients miss a Microsoft 365 bill, and they don't delete your data. They put you in kind of a suspension state where they sometimes will do limited services. Typically, it is a 30-day window. Frank, have you ever seen an Azure subscription go to non-payment?
I've not. That's a great question, but I think it's going to follow suit, like you said, with the with what 365 would normally do in a situation like that. They're not going to kill all your data, delete it, instantly if you miss a singular payment.
Yeah, I'd imagine so long as you're within a 30-day window, you'll be fine. But that's something we can follow up on. Jack had asked, would it work with an application like Applied Epic? Yes, you can use Epic in AVD. It works no problem. And so that's just the hosted version of Applied. These are 6 different things that we help with. You'll find them on our website. Azure Virtual Desktop is something that we're growing in and really excited about, of course, with our partnership with Nerdio. All the things Microsoft, we also do security and compliance through the lens of independent insurance agencies and others. And then, of course, managing co-managed IT services. So we'd love to engage with you guys and see how we can help further. We really appreciate the time and being here with us today. Frank, any last word? We're 1 minute over.
I'll take the hit on the 1 minute over. So my apologies, Adam. You did amazing. I don't want to take anything away from you, so I'll leave it there. We will wrap up 1 minute over here.
Hey, let's give Frank a round of applause. Rachel, you want to take us out?
Sure. We just want to say thank you to Adam and thank you to Frank for the fantastic presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope that this webinar has been valuable to you. If you would like to learn more about Kite's IT and consulting services, please feel free to reach out using any of the ways listed on this slide. Our team would be happy to meet with you and learn more about your agency's technology or consulting needs. Thank you again for attending this presentation, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everybody.